Hello, everyone. Welcome to my show. Autumn is here. I am your host, Francine Crawford. And today is times for the holidays. And we're going to talk about a little bit about grieving during the holidays. We know that some caregivers have lost some loved ones. And we're going to talk about that subject. And we have a wonderful guest today, Tish Dixon Williams. And she has wrote a book about that subject. So we want to welcome her to the show. Welcome, Tish. How are you?
Thank you so much. I'm well. Thank you so much, Francine, for having me today. Thank you.
Thank, thank you for spending some time with us and wanted to talk to us on Autumn is Here today. First, before we get started, tell me a little bit about yourself.
So, I am a pastor, preacher, wife, godmother, aunt, all of those wonderful things, author, speaker, and yeah, all of those things. Brooklyn native, Bridgehampton resident, and a little bit of a Georgia peach. So, all of those things rolled up into one.
Okay, okay. So you wrote this wonderful book, and I love the title, How the Grief Stole
Mhm.
Christmas. Please tell us a little bit about what inspired you to write this book.
Sure. So my father passed away last year in June of 2023.
Oh,
And he was a lover of Christmas. He was the type of person who's super quiet, didn't say a lot. He was the personification of still waters run deep. But when holiday time rolled around, he just came alive. He loved Christmas. My mom tells the story of how, when we were growing up as children, she would pick up the newspaper, and when she lifted it to read it, all of these holes would be cut out of the newspaper for all of the ads and coupons that he took out of there for toys. He loved Christmas. I was so blessed. I don't know what a bad Christmas is. He always went out of his way for his children to have a wonderful Christmas. And he just loved it. He loved the food, the family, the camaraderie. He loved the carols, all of it, the sweets. He loved all of it. And most importantly, he loved all of us coming together.
mm,
And so when he passed, I think the time that I was dreading the most was Christmas.
mm,
Um, and I wanted to make sure that I wasn't robbed of the joy of Christmas. And I literally said, I don't want grief to steal Christmas from me. I want to figure out a way to cope in the absence of my father, the physical absence of my father. And it prompted me to think about how the grief stole Christmas,
mm.
and thus a play on the words, how the grief stole Christmas. Was birthed from the title How the Grinch Stole Christmas, as just sort of a nod to Dr. Seuss. And I didn't want that to happen. I didn't want it to steal the joy of Christmas from me. And so, in an effort to figure out how to cope, I thought, well, if I'm going through this, there are other people who are going through this. The assumption is that there's so much joy surrounding the holidays that people are not depressed
Mm.
or saddened. And a lot of people are. And I was one of those people, but I was determined to enjoy Christmas. Even though I could not enjoy it physically with him, I was determined to enjoy it in honor of him. And so I wrote this book, How the Grief Stole Christmas. I call it a sermon in sonnet form because it is written like a Dr. Seuss book would be in a rhythmic, poetic style, a little hip hop inspiration there. And so yeah, I wrote it, and it's written through the lens of the Christmas story, of the key players of the Christmas story, examining how they all dealt with the five stages of grief, to include God.
Okay, awesome. That's awesome. So tell me, were you a caregiver to your dad?
Yes, so I'm one of four siblings. We were all caregivers in some way, shape, or form. Each of us, as siblings, we came together and said, okay, who's going to be responsible for what? And I was primarily responsible for their doctor's appointments. And so getting my mom and my dad to their doctor's appointments, scheduling transportation with them. And so, yes, we all shared the responsibility of caregiving of my parents. But yeah, that was a difficult time because my dad had been ill for some time,
Mhm.
but it all sort of culminated in that 2021 to 2023 space. And then my mom ended up getting sick. So they were both ill at the same time. My mom is still alive, bless God, she's great. But yeah, they both sort of felt ill at the same time. So it became us taking care of both of them simultaneously.
Mm. And how did that experience affect you?
It was interesting because I saw my parents. I've always looked at my parents as superheroes, the best people I've ever known in my life, hands down. And I don't say that just to, I mean it. My parents are two of the best people I've ever known in my whole life. And so I think for me, it was very difficult to see both of them challenged in the areas in which they were always so proficient. My mom, super smart, brilliant. And to see her sort of her cognitive function slow down, not
Mhm.
stop, but slow down or change in a way that was not familiar with what I know her to be. And then to see my dad physically kind of go down and him being literally one of the physically strongest people I've ever known in my life. So to see them both weak in the areas in which they were so strong, that was difficult for me. And you start to kind of understand, hey, they're not going to be here forever. And
Mhm.
you think somewhere in the back of your mind, you've always known that, but it's a difference when it comes to light, when it actually happens. There is a difference.
Mhm.
And so that was very difficult for me. Like most of up to that point, I didn't know a life without my parents.
Mhm.
I didn't know a life without living in the same place as my parents. And there's never been a time in my life where I was far enough from my parents where I couldn't get in a car and just go see them when I got ready.
Mhm.
And so that was a totally foreign and new place to be for me now.
Mhm.
Yeah. So
Okay. So through this experience, and I'm glad to hear that your mom is still here.
yeah, she'll be here in a few days for Christmas. I'm
Oh,
excited.
awesome, awesome. Well, but going through that experience and with your dad all the way to the end, what did you learn, and what would you say to people going through that experience?
Be patient.
Mm, okay.
And that's hard. Being a caregiver is difficult. And
Yes.
I found that of all the things, my patience often wore thin.
Mhm.
I wasn't as patient as I like to think I was. I thought I would, but no, I wasn't patient at all. Be patient. Um, yeah, I think that's the biggest thing. Just be patient. And try to be we will never understand what they're feeling. We will never understand what they're going through because it's not us.
Mhm.
But if at all possible, if and when possible, try to be empathetic and at least say this: I don't know what they're feeling. I
Mhm.
don't know what they're going through. And so I have to take a step back because I don't know what it feels like not to be able to move the way you want to move,
Mhm.
or not to be able to uh, gather a memory, not to be able to remember a name, not to be able to walk up and down the steps the way you so freely did it before,
Mhm.
not to have an appetite. So when we care for our aging parents, and as much as it can be difficult, it can be trying, it can test our patience. The one thing I think we always have to keep in mind is it is difficult for them because life as they've known it up until that point is completely different.
Mhm.
Imagine for some waking up one day and you don't even have the cognitive function that you once had.
Mhm.
You don't have the strength that you once had. That's got to be a difficult adjustment. And so I think in times of when my patience would wear thin, I would remember like, yeah, but they're never going to be what they once were. And that can't be it can't be harder for me than it is for them. And so I would say be patient and remember that when our parents or seniors in our lives get ill, it is a major life shift
Yes.
for
Yes.
them, major life shift. And what they want more than anything is still some semblance of control.
Mhm.
Because in essence, physically, in a lot of ways, they've lost control over a lot.
Mhm.
The bodies that they've known are not their own. Their legs don't do what they want them to do anymore. They're on all sorts of medication that manipulates their body to do what it's supposed to do, all of those kind of things. And so I think patience and understanding are what I learned the most in that season.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Let's talk about how this book and writing this book, the experience of writing this book, helped you.
It helped me kind of put in perspective that I don't have to lose Christmas. One of the main point of the book, if I could put it in one little sentence, I say, grief does not have to steal Christmas. You don't have to lose it all. What
Mhm.
grief steals, grace restores. it really is your call. So grief doesn't have to steal Christmas. It really is your call. What grief steals, grace restores. You don't have to lose it all. That's how it goes. And it's this idea that we have a choice how we want to celebrate or not. That's the key. There's nothing that says you have to celebrate if you don't want to. And I think sometimes we push people past the space of grief too soon.
Mm-hmm.
And I also think we do ourselves a disservice when we don't lean into grief, when we try to bypass it. One thing I know for sure is grief will not be denied. She will have her time, whether you give it to her or not. You don't give it to her, she's going to take it.
Right.
And that's not always a fun ride. Right? But I say in the book also, what happens if when we encounter grief, what if we chose to dance with her instead?
Mm-hmm.
Instead of wrestling with her, what if we chose to dance with her instead and choose the path of least resistance? What if we chose to do that instead? That maybe grief is what should fill the empty seats at our Christmas table.
Mm-hmm.
That maybe, grief, I heard a quote that said it this way: grief is just love with nowhere to go.
Ah,
And so I write this in the book, we grieve in proportion to how much we love. So if you loved a lot, you're going to grieve a lot. And grief is not only, I also take the time to define grief. Grief is not only the passing of a loved one. Grief is transition. Grief is struggling. Grief is the feeling when you're trying to make ends meet and you don't think you will. Grief is when you get that pink slip you didn't see. Grief is when you and your lover are on the outs and y'all are trying to figure this thing out. Grief comes in many ways. Grief is an unexpected job loss. Grief is an unexpected transition. All of that is grief. And so I think in the book, I also try to help people redefine grief because I don't want people to think that grief is just in the passing of a loved one. That might be the most familiar form of grief or the most familiar way that we define it. But grief is so much more. I can remember when I left my old job in corporate to pastor. I knew very clearly there were certain things I was going to miss. I was going to miss the salary. Amen. I was going to miss, but I knew I was going to miss the people I worked with.
mm,
All of those things. My office overlooked Central Park in Times Square in Columbus Circle. I knew I was going to miss being there every day. I knew that. I knew it. But when I finally stopped working and I was home and, pastoring, there was this hole and I couldn't identify. I was like, what is this? Like, I'm happy doing what I'm doing. I'm glad, I prayed for this. I said, Lord, I don't want to be a bivocational pastor. So make it so I'm in a position to leave my job and pastor full time. And the Lord did that. And I was like, so what is this emptiness that I'm feeling? Here's what I never considered. I was grieving my routine.
mm,
I missed my routine.
mhm,
And it wasn't until I was able to identify that I began to feel better. Because now that I identified it, I could start to sort of work through why I was feeling the way that I felt. I was grieving my routine because I had a routine. I got in my car every day. I left at a certain time. I listened to, Hot 97, listen to them do the pranks and stuff. And then I'd switch over to listen to the gospel, Erica Get Up in the Mornings. And then I'd park my car and say hi to the guys in the garage. And then I'd wave to the dry cleaning people and grab my coffee and go get my breakfast and just this day. And I loved it. And that's how my day went. And I was very happy. I called my sister-in-law in the car. We chop it up for a little while. Like I had a routine,
mm,
get to work, all. And when I lost that, I could not identify it. And I later came to identify it. It was grief. So in this book, what it did for me is it helped me really define what grief is,
mhm,
put a name to it, and say that it's okay to experience it. Grief is not the enemy here. It really isn't.
mhm,
Grief helps us to process what we're going through. It really isn't the enemy. It'll feel like it because grief is heavy. It's often heavy,
mm.
but we can dance with her. We
Okay.
can dance with her. We can. And that's what the book did for me. I wrote the book because I needed to learn how to dance with grief.
Mhm,
I wouldn't ignore it because I didn't want it to show up in unhealthy ways in my body, in my system, in my world, in my life.
mhm.
And so I knew that I had to make room for grief. And when I did that, it became a little bit easier to manage. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Well, thank you so much. Is there anything else that you think, or any points that you think that you would like to share with the audience, or something that you want them to really get out of the book, or something?
Yeah, I think for me, it is my sincere prayer that once people enjoy this book, and it is a short read, it's a very short read. Like I said, it's a sermon in some sonnet form, so it's a short read. The foreword is by Bishop Guy Robinson, who is a wonderful mental health professional, but he's also a bishop. And so he bridges the gap between ministry and mental health. And he wrote the foreword for me, which I'm so grateful for. But there's great insight in the foreword. And then the book just has like this melodic, poetic run. But what I really want people to understand is you don't have to lose it all. You don't have to lose it all. And to the person who has lost something or someone, I know you feel like you've lost everything. You don't have to lose it all. That's what I want people to know. You don't have to lose everything in the midst of your grief. And when in time,
Mhm.
you can find some benefits to grief because I found great grace in grieving. Yeah.
Okay, awesome, awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking time and sharing
Thank
your
you.
experience and your book, and taking your and your pain and making it purpose, and sharing with others, because yes, other people are going through it, and it is tough. And the thing about what you're saying is that kind of identify it. You know,
Yeah,
we don't know how to identify it. Things are happening and we don't know what it is. And
that's right.
yeah, and it's grief. So
It's
that's
great.
awesome that you were
Mhm.
um want to share this and help other people. So I really appreciate you coming on and
No, I
sharing
appreciate
about what
you.
you
Thank you for the platform. Thank you for the time. It's a wonderful podcast. So thank you. I'm honored to be one of your guests. Thank you.
do. Thank you so much, and have happy holidays.
Happy holidays, everybody. You don't have to lose it all.
You don't have to lose it all.
Don't have to
Okay.
lose it all.
All right. Thank you so much. I appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.